So, here I am, a dude who thought he had a pretty standard life. Married for 7 years, no kids, both of us working steady jobs, and planning our vacations around her crazy sales schedule. Her name's Amanda, and she's the kind of person who, let's just say, doesn't really know how to relax. Always on the go, always has something sarcastic to say about my laid-back attitude. We were that couple, she was the fire, and I was supposedly the cool water that calmed her down. At least that's what I thought. Lately, though, something's been off. Little things at first, like staying late at work more often, or her phone suddenly getting all these notifications when it used to sit silent for hours. She'd brush it off, saying it was work stress or some nonsense about needing space. I figured she was dealing with the typical grind, and I let it slide. You trust your wife, right? But here's the kicker. We're on a flight for what was supposed to be our big makeup vacation, one of those getaways to reconnect. Well, the joke was on me because life decided to throw the wildest curveball right at me somewhere over Colorado, with nowhere to escape. We were barely an hour into this makeup vacation, and the plane had been sitting on the runway for what felt like forever. Amanda was already irritated, huffing and puffing every 5 minutes about how we could have driven there faster. To calm her down, I offered to grab her noise-canceling headphones from her carry-on. She gave me a look like she couldn't believe I was actually trying to help. Classic Amanda, she just rolled her eyes and waved her hand, which I took as permission. So I dig through her bag, and that's when I notice a second phone. Not her actual phone, the one that's constantly dinging and buzzing with work emails, but a cheap, disposable-looking one. I'm no Sherlock, but even I knew this wasn't normal. She never mentioned a work phone, and this one was the kind you'd see in those crime dramas where people make shady deals in parking garages. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it up. At first, it looked innocent enough, just a bunch of text messages. But then I see the name Kyle. I tell myself it could be work-related, right? Maybe a coworker? But before I can even rationalize it, I'm looking at a full-on thread of texts, and they're not talking spreadsheets and quarterly reports. Explicit. That's the only word for it. This guy, Kyle, is sending messages that would make a sailor blush, and she's eating it up, responding with the kind of language I hadn't seen from her since our early dating days. They're planning hookups, reminiscing about the last time, talking about new things to try. My stomach dropped. I actually felt sick reading it. But here's where it gets crazier. One of the messages mentions that he can't wait to see her again once she's back from the trip. Meaning, this whole makeup vacation was just a smokescreen so she could get back to Kyle. Before I could even process that level of betrayal, a flight attendant came by to offer drinks, and Amanda snapped at her, clearly annoyed. I just sat there, staring at her, this woman I thought I knew. She looked at me like I was the one acting weird, and then I did something that even I didn't see coming. As the plane finally took off, I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears, the anger practically bubbling up through my skin. I looked over at Amanda, watching her sip her overpriced airline wine and scroll through her phone, acting like the perfect, annoyed wife on a delayed flight. She had no idea her second life had been blown wide open. I leaned over, pretending to be casual. So, Amanda, who's Kyle? Her head snapped around so fast you'd think I'd thrown a bucket of ice water on her. The look in her eyes? Priceless. It was like she'd seen a ghost, and that ghost was her husband finally waking up to her bullshit. She quickly tried to play it off, giving me a laugh that came out more like a bark. Kyle, you're being paranoid, babe. It's just a coworker. Really? I said, keeping my voice low but dripping with sarcasm. Does this coworker often ask you to, and I quote, wear that black lace thing again? She went pale, and I swear, she looked like she was ready to bolt right off the plane. She started to say something, the usual rehearsed excuse, I bet, but I cut her off. Save it. I saw the messages, Amanda. All of them. The cheap phone in your bag kind of gave it away. I lifted the phone for her to see, and her jaw clenched so tight, I thought she might shatter her teeth. And just then, as if things couldn't get any more surreal, the flight attendant, a guy named Mike, who had been a bit too friendly when we boarded, noticed the tension. He came over with a forced smile and asked if we needed anything. I couldn't resist. I turned to him and said, actually, I could use a drink. And hey, maybe my wife too. Though I'm pretty sure she'll be drowning her guilt in wine soon enough. Amanda's face flushed with a mix of rage and panic. She stammered, "Can we just talk about this later? We're on a damn plane." "Oh, I think we're way past that," I hissed. "How long has this been going on, Amanda? Or is there more than just Kyle?" She started to whisper yell, telling me I was making a scene, but the cracks in her composure were obvious. Finally, she snapped, "Fine. You want to know the truth? Yeah, I've been seeing someone. Because you're so damn boring, John. All you do is work, work, work. You think a few vacations make up for the fact that you're never around." "Boring." I laughed bitterly, louder than I intended, drawing a few curious glances from nearby passengers. "So, instead of talking to me, you decided to go behind my back with some random guy? Classy, Amanda. Real mature." At this point, even the flight attendant was trying to stay out of it, but he was hovering nearby. And that's when the absurdity of it all hit me. Here I was, in the middle of a full-blown, marriage-ending showdown at 30,000 feet. And then it hit me. I'd been holding back my own secret. As she sat there, looking both pissed and desperate, I felt a dark urge bubbling up, a little bit of revenge in the form of truth. I took a deep breath, let it out slowly, and leaned in close. "You think I'm the boring one?" I whispered with a smirk. "Let me tell you a little story, Amanda. You remember the flight attendant who helped us with our seats when we boarded? Her name's Hailey." Amanda's face went from defiant to confused. I let her marinate in it for a second before dropping the bomb. "Hailey and I had a lot of fun last month on my last work trip." I shrugged, pretending it was no big deal, though my heart was pounding. Funny how she just happened to be assigned to this flight. Life's weird, huh? Her eyes went wide, and I could practically see the gears grinding as she processed what I'd just said. The shock was quickly replaced by raw fury, a twisted mix of betrayal and hypocrisy that made me want to laugh. "You're lying," she spat, but her voice was shaky. "Believe what you want," I replied, and then I turned, catching Hailey's eye. She gave me a small, knowing smile, probably wondering if I'd ever follow through on what we talked about. But the look on Amanda's face was too good to waste. She was unraveling, and it was glorious. She clenched her fists so hard her knuckles went white. "You're disgusting," she whispered, her voice low and venomous. "I can't believe I ever loved you." "Well, honey, I guess that makes two of us." The seatbelt light pinged off, and Amanda stood up, practically launching herself toward the restroom. She slammed the door so hard it shook, leaving me alone to breathe for the first time since this whole mess started. I leaned back in my seat, the adrenaline coursing through me like fire. In that moment, I felt a strange sense of peace. And then, in a bold move I never would have had the guts for just a day earlier, I turned to Hailey and whispered, "Meet me in the back in 5? She nodded, a faint smile tugging at her lips. 5 minutes later, we were in the cramped galley near the back, pretending to reach for extra napkins and cups, but Hailey leaned in close, her voice barely above a whisper. "Everything okay, John?" "Well, I think I'm about to be a single man," I said, letting out a bitter chuckle. "You good with that?" Her eyes sparkled with mischief. "Very." She gave my hand a quick, reassuring squeeze before heading back out to serve drinks, leaving me with a strange sense of liberation. I went back to my seat, watching Amanda storm down the aisle, her eyes red-rimmed, mascara slightly smudged. She glared at me with a look that could have melted glass. She leaned in close as she passed and hissed, "You're gonna regret this." I just smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years. "Guess we'll see, won't we?" Amanda stormed back to her seat beside me, her entire face a mask of simmering rage. For a second, I thought she might actually try to slap me. The absurdity of it all nearly made me laugh out loud. Here we were high above the earth, in the middle of the most surreal, twisted face-off of my life. The plane jolted with turbulence, and Amanda gripped the armrest, her knuckles white, though she kept glaring at me. I leaned over, dropping my voice just above a whisper. "Something wrong, Amanda? You look a little rattled." She took a slow, deep breath, looking like she was on the edge of an explosion, then shot back. "You're enjoying this, aren't you? You think getting even with some airhead stewardess is going to hurt me? You're pathetic." "Oh, I think we both know I'm not the pathetic one here," I replied, shrugging casually. "At least I didn't need a secret burner phone to cover up my tracks." "You don't get it, do you?" she hissed. "I've been miserable. You're a stranger to me. I needed someone who actually sees me." "Sees you?" I scoffed. "So that's why you've been sneaking around with a guy who texts you like he's writing a script for a porn flick?" Her face flushed with anger, but I barely noticed because the seatbelt light dinged on, and Hailey's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a bit of turbulence. Please remain seated and fasten your seatbelts," she announced smoothly, though her eyes flicked over to me with a hint of amusement. Amanda shot a hateful glare at Hailey, and I caught her eyes narrowing as if putting it all together. Her hand tightened on the armrest, nails digging in, and she leaned toward me, voice low and dangerous. "So, what now, John? You think you're just going to flirt with some glorified waitress in front of me? You don't have the guts to leave me." I smirked, feeling bolder than ever. "Oh, Amanda, I think you're underestimating me. If you want a divorce, let's make it easy for both of us." Her face twisted into something almost cruel, and she leaned in, barely an inch from my face. "Fine, John. Let's see how much you enjoy single life." Before I could respond, she raised her hand, and in one swift, unexpected move, dumped the remnants of her wine right over my lap. The red liquid soaked into my jeans, and the nearby passengers gasped, wide-eyed at the sudden spectacle. "Oh, is that how we're playing it?" I asked, laughing despite myself. "Good to know, Amanda." The flight attendants, including Hailey, were all staring now, trying to keep professional expressions, but clearly struggling to hide the surprise. Hailey stepped closer, offering me napkins, her lips barely twitching into a smile as she leaned in. "Rough flight?" she asked with a wink. I couldn't resist. I smiled back, holding her gaze just a little too long, a bit of a show for Amanda. She caught it, and I swear, I thought she was going to throw a second drink my way. That's when Hailey looked at Amanda and, in a tone that was just a bit too sweet, said, "Let me know if there's anything I can get you, ma'am. Maybe a calming tea?" Amanda sneered, and I thought she might actually burst out laughing. Instead, she turned her head, looking out the window, refusing to acknowledge either of us. And there we sat, in a bizarre, tension-filled silence, flying thousands of feet above the ground with no escape. Just me, my cheating wife, and her soon-to-be ex-husband basking in a strange, twisted satisfaction. As the plane continued its journey, I realized that life as I knew it was about to change, and, strangely enough, I couldn't wait to see how it all turned out. The turbulence settled, but the tension in our row only thickened. Amanda sat there, lips pressed into a furious line, as if holding back the storm brewing in her head. She hadn't said a word since her little wine stunt, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was finally in control of the narrative. The look on her face told me she knew it too. The plane began its descent, and as we prepared for landing, I took a deep breath, knowing it was time to seal this twisted chapter shut. I turned to her, choosing my words carefully. "Amanda," I said in a low, calm voice, "I think we both know this is the end." She snorted, rolling her eyes. "Oh, please, John. You think this whole drama changes anything? You're still the same predictable, pathetic man you've always been." "You're right," I replied, surprising myself with the strength in my voice. "I was predictable. That's why you thought you could pull this crap on me and get away with it. But I'm done playing the fool." I could see her trying to come up with a cutting response, but I was already one step ahead. I pulled out her burner phone, the one I'd slipped back into my pocket earlier, and waved it just enough for her to see. "You won't be needing this anymore, will you?" Her face blanched, and her eyes darted around as if searching for an escape. Before she could even think to grab it from me, I tapped a few buttons, erasing every explicit message, every piece of evidence, and held it out to her. "Consider this my parting gift," I said, shoving the phone into her hands. "You get a clean slate, Amanda, and I get my life back." She stared at me, stunned, and I could see the wheels turning as she tried to make sense of what just happened. Her smugness, her control, it all crumbled right there, thousands of feet in the air, with nothing to anchor her but her own regret. As we landed, I felt an unexpected sense of relief washing over me. I wasn't just breaking free from Amanda. I was breaking free from a version of myself I didn't recognize anymore. The wheels touched down, and for the first time in a long time, I felt grounded. The doors opened, and as we disembarked, I didn't wait for her. Instead, I made a beeline for Hailey, who was waiting at the front, watching with a sly smile as Amanda and I exited the plane in a fractured silence. I gave Hailey a nod, a silent promise that I'd be in touch, not out of desperation, but out of a newfound confidence. Walking out of that plane, the reality of my next chapter hit me, and it wasn't filled with anger or resentment anymore. It was just freedom, the kind I hadn't felt in years. As I stepped into the terminal, I didn't look back. I didn't need to.